everybody. It's your friendly digital technology librarian, Christy here. We have reached another Friday, so of course I have another Film Rec Friday, but this week kicks off a super special dual set of videos. If you watch this channel for any period of time, you absolutely know that I adore horror films. So this time of year is just my favorite time of year. It's the time when everybody's looking for a new recommendation for something scary, and it just makes me super duper happy. Not pumpkin spice though. I don't need pumpkin spice in anything ever. I like pumpkins just fine, but not pumpkin spice. Anyway, I digress. So this week and next week, we are covering 10 more free, fabulously frightful horror recs. Today is part one. Next week will be part two. None of these, would I say, are ranked over the others. They're just an additional series of recommendations. Last year, I did a top 25 countdown and videotaped the top 10, and those ones were in order. I'll make sure that I put a link over here, or maybe it's over here. I don't know. I'm really bad at that part kind of thing, but I'll put a link to that video so you can check those out. Those are some of my all-time favorite horror films that are available for free through our video streaming services. And these are just going to be a couple of handfuls actually, more recs for people who are looking for additional scares. These movies are all really, really great. Some are scary in a supernatural way. Some are sort of funny, scary. I tried to pick a blend of titles because everybody likes something different, right? And everyone's going to be in a different mood for a different kind of horror film. So, as always, all of the recommendations you hear are going to be available entirely free with the use of your Milan-Berlin library card through one of our video streaming services. Today's 5 picks are going to be available on Hoopla and on Canopy. So without any further ado, I'm going to jump in to these first 5 recommendations. My first recommendation for this week is for a film available on Hoopla Digital, and it's called The Dark and the Wicked. Now, I had not heard of this film prior to putting together this new set of recommendations. It was actually a recommendation from a friend who knows that I have an affinity for horror films that take place on farmland and rural communities. There's just something about that particular setting that works for me, and boy, did this film totally work for me. It takes place on this really isolated farm. An aging man is at the end stages of his life. His wife is caring for him, and she, of course, is going through the stages of grief, but there's something else going on, something much darker, something much more scary. And everything about the setting, the mood, the sound, it perpetuates this blanketing sense of dread, and you feel it from the get-go. There's something in the stillness. That's it. There's something in the stillness of this film at the beginning that makes you know something isn't right. Since the man is clearly at the end stages of his life, his children end up coming home to the farm. Their names are Louise and Michael. They both got their own lives, their own concerns, but of course they want to be with their father at the end. And when they get home, they notice that something is definitely not right with their mother. There's something wrong. And she keeps telling them that they have to go. They can't stay. There's this thing that, but she never elaborates. She doesn't explain. And so that blanketing sense of dread just gets heavier and heavier and heavier. And then things really start to happen. It's not just in the atmosphere anymore. Like there are real things that happen, and then there's those sort of weird nebulous supernatural concerns and that start popping up, and it really gets to you. Like there's this tension in the silence, and I love films that do that. And I think that's something about these horror films that take place in rural settings that very few other horror films do. It's those pockets of silence, those very heavy, loaded pockets. Because, if you do go stand in the middle of a field, there's a silence to it, but there's always sound. You know what I mean? Like, you hear like the wind rustling over the field, and you hear like little animals making their noises, and in this kind of film there's always this sense of something sinister, and it's easy to impart that into those pockets of like of lack of human sounds. And I just love it, and this movie does it so does it works with it so well. um you know the setting makes you think it's going to be very safe. We talk about the heartland, and nothing bad will happen there, so that makes it the perfect place for terrible things to happen. And that's why this movie works so well. you know there's so much stillness. So when you get these little tiny snaps of action, or little tiny moments of that lead to jump scares, and there are some in here, uh, they just are incredibly effective. So if you're looking for something incredibly atmospheric, that has a good deal of payoff in that encroaching fear, that concern, check out The Dark and the Wicked. It wasn't hugely talked about, I don't think. I mean, it came out in 2020. I know a lot of us weren't, super into the whole exploring new movies thing, just because we were all so isolated in and of itself, the time. But this one's so worth the watch. I really, really did like it. And I think that if you like that sort of quiet stillness, and you enjoy that fear that can live in that stillness, you will absolutely love this movie. So make sure you check it out on Hoopla Digital. The Dark and the Wicked, absolutely recommended. My second rec for this week is also available on Hoopla Digital, and that is for the 2005 film The Descent. Now, 2005 was a hot minute ago, so maybe you missed this movie when it first came out. But if you haven't seen it, and even if you have, you absolutely need to watch it, especially if you happen to be a fan of horror films mixed with action. This one just moves so quickly. And then when you blend that action, the jump scares, the atmosphere together with this mad web of interpersonal drama and trauma, it just blends together in this fantastic, tension-filled movie. I grew up loving like horror films that had kick butt female characters, and this one definitely has a cast full of women who are 100% determined to survive. I'm not going to say that all of them do, because it is a horror genre film. But that sort of desperation super duper comes across while you're watching. You've got this crew of friends, all of which have personal backstories that we start to see eke out across the hour and 39 minutes of the film. But we see friendships either sort of flourish or totally fall apart, based on this need to survive. And it becomes as much that and the interpersonal relationships between these women as it does the crawlers that inhabit the film. The crawlers are super creepy, like seriously creepy, and I love that. I really like when films do a lot with dread and atmosphere, but there's also something to be said about like a real monster that you see on the screen that is going to freak you out and gross you out at the same time. And these totally do that. Like that's why we love xenomorphs. That's why we love, kaiju films. We like seeing like realized things, and I think this does that very well. So you throw that into the mix as well. You throw in a really, really great production team that gives the movie a sense of claustrophobia. These women, they get stuck in this series of caves, and they discover that the caves are inhabited by these crawlers. And it's a desperate struggle to escape from these caves and these crawlers, and you feel as stuck in those isolated places as these women. I mean, there are a few scenes where the color of the film, the sound, the sort of muffled sounds, it just works so well together that you feel like you're in that cave with them, and it just makes the movie so effective. I can't say enough good things about this. Uh Again, if you enjoy action with your horror, if you enjoy strong female characters, if you enjoy a lot of drama mixed in with excellent production, this one's a must watch. Seriously, everyone I feel that likes horror films should see The Descent. It's a great movie. It's a lot of fun. I think that's the other thing. It's scary, but it's like you still have fun while you're watching. It doesn't, leave you feeling empty inside at the end. I don't know. At least I didn't. I definitely, you definitely have that feeling of, I just watched an incredible horror movie when the last scene rolls, but it's not that sort of devastated, I will never be the same that some really fantastic horror films leave you feeling. So if you are looking for that kind of movie, the kind that will leave you saying, I had a great time, check out The Descent. Seriously, I don't think you'll regret it. It's such a good time. Moving right along, my next pick is available on Canopy, and that is for the short film The Devil's Harmony. Now, The Devil's Harmony is only 15 minutes long, so you absolutely have time to watch it. And honestly, you really should. Devil's Harmony tells the story of this teenage bullied girl who leads her high school's glee club, and after years and years of being abused by uh, bullies and popular kids in school, after years of having her pleas ignored by administration, she takes her glee club and she brings them on this mad trail of audible destruction, and it's just so much fun to watch. No blood and guts, none, zero, zilch. And how do you have a trail of destruction with no blood or guts? Well, that's a little bit of the mystery of this film. Um, this really is kind of the perfect horror film for anyone who is looking for something a little bit absurdist, who just needs a break, or anybody who has ever felt like an outsider. If you loved those 80s films of John Hughes, this is the horror film for you. It's also particularly and amazingly funny for anybody who's ever been part of an a cappella group. I was in a collegiate a cappella group, and some of the weird little quirks just really made me laugh. Clearly the writer knew like what he was doing. And there's also just a ton of wordplay going on throughout the film. I mean, it's only 15 minutes, so it's amazing to me how many elements of horror and comedy the writers were able to pack in here without making it feel overly manipulative. It's just this madcap, absurdist, hilarious horror film. And, I've been talking about how it's so weird and silly and how I laughed all the way through, but it also does a very good job at making it atmospherically creepy. Like, the music and sound are spot on, and I do think that that's a nod, of course, to the whole punniness, The Devil's Harmony. It's gleefully scary, and it's a glee club. And it's just 15 minutes of pure, unadulterated joy for somebody who enjoys comic horror. I honestly can't recommend this one enough. You're not watching Poltergeist or anything like that, obviously, but it's still creepy. It's still atmospherically sound, and it's still incredibly entertaining to watch. Like, the last moments are a little bit poignant, also like silly and absurdist, but I mean, there's definitely emotional content there, and I don't even now, after I watched it, I only watched it a handful of days ago. Even now, I still kind of get the giggles when I think about different scenes. And remember, it's 15 minutes. This is not an hour-long film. So the fact that they were able to pack in that much evocative, that many evocative beats, it's honestly really, really impressive. So if you like a quick horror film, if you like music, if you like Glee clubs, if you enjoyed like the series Glee, um, but also if you just enjoy really, really solid, clever writing, especially British style writing, it definitely has that very. It has a bit of a Monty Python feel to it too. Check out The Devil's Harmony. 15 minutes, it's nothing. Just check it out. It's really, really great. It's available on Canopy. Watch it as soon as you can. If your preference for horror films leans more along the serious side of things, you definitely need to check out the movie The Transfiguration, which is also available on Canopy. Um, Now, The Transfiguration tells the story of a troubled teenager named Milo. He had a very difficult childhood with a lot of trauma. He is currently dealing with not just bullies, but a full on gang. I mean, this kid leads the furthest thing from a charmed life. And to kind of cope with that, he ends up becoming obsessed with vampires and vampirism. He is fascinated by the folklore. He is fascinated by the concept of blood and death. And it's very, very dark and incredibly heavy and thoroughly steeped in realism. At no point in this film will you ever see like someone sprouting fangs, turning into a bat. Like this is a very real world. And I think that's what makes this movie so terrifying to me, that the monsters in this movie are absolutely out there right now. Like, full stop. The villains of this piece exist. Um, Milo meets a young girl named Sophie, who is also incredibly isolated, who is also dealing with some really dark things going on. And you know, from the beginning of the film, we see this very isolated young man, and we do see him form a real connection with Sophie, and we see things start to change. But it also brings up the question of how far gone do you have to be before there's no turning back? And again, that's one of those things that makes this movie so real and so scary, is because it's a very legit question. Like, that's what I find fascinating about realistic horror, in that, you know, the questions about morality really come to the forefront. And there are so many moments in this where you do have that sort of, you know, knee-jerk reaction where you're just like, why am I rooting for this person or that person? Or it's just a really complex, multifaceted film that I think works really well even for people who are not horror movie fans, but also works well for people who like scary films, just because there's so many really creepy, awful moments in this. Um, you know, I went into it not really knowing what to expect. I'd read plenty of synopses, and, you know, I thought, well, maybe it's just going to be more of like a a creepy drama. But no, it's pretty scary in parts. Like, there were definitely moments where I was like, what is going on? And I was really surprised. It wasn't like a jump scare per se, but definitely had those moments of shock. And I definitely feel like the director does an excellent job of making the characters seem very real, even and realistic, even when they're doing things that you think are outside of that realistic realm. So, if you're interested in a movie that plays with realism, that relies heavily on drama and acting, that is really, really solid storyline wise, check out The Transfiguration. Really, I feel like of all the films that I watched for this little compilation list, this is the one that I go back and think about the most, in terms of like still trying to unpack bits and pieces, because it's a very heavy movie. Uh, but still one that I'm super glad that I watched. I haven't seen a horror film like this in a while. And I think if you like sort of complex storylines, that you will like this very much. So again, Transfiguration, available on Canopy. Definitely check it out. Okay, my final recommendation for this week is also available on Canopy, and that's the movie Stakeland. Now, Stakeland is one of those horror films that just is a really good time. The cast isn't necessarily packed with Shakespearean trained actors, though it does have Kelly McGillis in it. And I guess this film marked the first movie she'd done in like 10 years or something like that. The acting is solid. It's more just the storyline and the pacing that really pull you in. So in Stakeland, we're dealing with a sort of rural Midwestern heartland area of the United States after the world has essentially fallen to this plague of vampirism. Now, you've got very small pockets of humanity that still are around, but for the most part, people are pretty isolated because the more people you have in a group, the more chance that this vampirism is going to affect a huge group of people. Anyway, you've got a young man played by Connor Paolo. He was in Gossip Girl, I guess. I'm not a big Gossip Girl person, so I don't know. But he does a very decent job playing the character Martin. He ends up losing his family, and he gets taken under the wing of this really grizzled, really experienced vampire hunter named Mister. I mean, you'll find that in this film you have a lot of people's names that are what they do. So he ends up following Mister in an attempt to get to the Promised Land, which is supposedly an area that is free of vampires. Anyway, this vampire hunter takes Martin through this route past, the rural Midwest, and they encounter other people, lots of vampires, and it's just like a ton of action, a lot of jump scares. They meet many, many not great human beings that remain. But along the way, they also meet like good people too, including the character played by Kelly McGillis, who's just called Sister. I believe that she's a nun. And it's just a good time. Like I said, sometimes I'm in the mood for just a horror movie that scares me, that will make me jump, that will just keep me on the edge of my seat, where I'm not necessarily thinking about the backstory of every single character, where I'm not thinking about like the meaning of life or anything more complex than what's going on the screen. And this is perfect for that. Seriously, the hour and a half goes by in a flash. It's fun, it's fast paced, it's scary the way that you want it to be. There are quite a few like familiar faces the more that I think about it, that you'll see pop up. And again, it's just the whole point, I think, is to have a good time. And you absolutely do. If you enjoy movies that move along really quickly, if you like vampire stories, if you are like me and you love settings that take place in, say, the rural Midwestern region, check out Stakeland. You will have so much fun, and sometimes that's what you want when you find a horror movie. So make sure you check out Stakeland on Canopy. Highly, highly recommended. Okay, that brings us to the end of part 1 of our 10 more fabulously frightful horror movie picks. Next week we'll be exploring part 2, so of course 5 more recommendations for everyone out there. If you have any recommendations for fellow fans, please, please, please place a comment below. I'm always looking for movie recommendations, especially those of this particular genre. Or if you happen to have recommendations for themes that you'd like to see us explore in the future, please put those down below as well. Definitely really helps me out. As always, thank you so, so much for joining me this week. I love talking to people about horror movies, so these 2 weeks are my favorites out of the entire year. And with that, I'm going to bring things to a close. We will see you next week. Bye!